Hello, welcome to Black Comics Universe, presented by Peep Game Comics, exclusively here on The Experience. Please help us out by hitting share and giving us a like and a follow. Then make sure to tune in for our original programming 7 days a week. Black Comics Universe streams live every Tuesday at 6 p.m. on all DSPs. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. And as always, please stay tuned for Miss Jen's Minute to Skim It right after this. I'm just taking it easy. I'm still coming off the high of FSK Day. Special shout out to my man Mike Watson. Thanks for the invite. I was on for several hours straight talking about comics, business, comic fandom. Another heated argument about, well, it wasn't heated this time around. It was a civil conversation about Comic Cons and Carla. That's where the really heated conversation is, Carla. If you're not hip to Carla, please check out Freestyle Comics Hot Shot, and you learn about Carla and why Hot Shot fans think she's problematic.
I got to tell you something.
Yeah.
I was at FSK Day, like I was in the building.
And this is Kyle, my producer, everybody.
Right. Yeah. I was in the building, like sitting directly behind Mike while he's streaming the whole thing, right?
Right, yeah.
And during the Carla conversation, I couldn't hear what anybody had to say except for you. Then during the whole, convention conversation,
right,
I couldn't hear what anybody had to say except for you and Danny Quick.
That's because
either I'm tuned into Imani's voice and I could just hear it ringing through the halls, or
I got
somebody
really
ate their Wheaties that day.
I can't prepare. Now, don't get me wrong. I can't prepare. That's for sure. I can't prepare for that conversation. I was pacing my house after our last show, thinking about everything I wanted to say. I didn't get a chance to say, so I spilled it there. Maybe I'll share it. Maybe I'll share it later on.
Pages of Hot Shot art, 2 original Mike Watson pages. Now I got to have Mike Watson ink his own pages.
Yeah, he got out. Yeah, he passed those duties on, which I think is actually a good thing. I think I've been wanting to see what his artwork looks like when someone else inks it, so that should be. And I did see a page of 11 that he didn't ink. That I think it's Lori Foster. I think her name is. Might be the inker. But
I don't know. These pages are just pencils. And I go to Mike. I go, Mike, who's gonna ink these Mike Watson originals?
Mm-hmm.
He goes, I don't know. Yeah. I go, I think it should be Mike Watson, and he should finish doing his job.
Well, yeah. And I mean, that's
everybody standing around just starts laughing.
See, that's the thing. It's like that time thing when it comes to indies, man. It's just like there's no way around it, and I've learned to empathize with creators more now. But
absolutely. I mean, but it's one of those things. You're standing there, and it's me and Mike and Victor, right, and Tony and Fish and all these, right, everybody on the FSK brand. We're all standing around talking, and I'm going, well, somebody didn't do their homework.
Well, I was like, that's the thing that fascinates me the most about FSK, about Mike Watson, is that he has so many resources. He has so many people as far as supporting what he's doing. It's like, that's the only thing that sort of gets me. It's like, you got so many people, that have their hands in this. It's like, man, I'm always expecting more work because of so many people involved, but I can't.
Yep. I just will say this. I'm excited for 5-star.
Yeah, that looks pretty good.
So I'll let you get back to it, but I had to tell you that you were clearly the loudest, most clarion voice at FSK Day.
I came prepared technologically. I came prepared mentally.
Yeah, you ate your Wheaties.
Emotionally, I was ready to go. Yes, and again, shout out to Mike for the invite. Shout out to Danny and Morgan and Javon for last week's conversation. Um, I am going to continue that conversation actually when I have my next guest come on. My next guest is going to be Jamar Nicholas. It's just like no sooner than I come off the heels of that conversation about cons. Me and Javon, me and Jamar had a really good conversation about it, and he had some insights I want him to share personally. I'm not going to spoil that. I'm going to let him share his thoughts on that when he comes on. Yeah, and I'm trying not to get myself worked up this time. I'm all by myself in my studio. That'll be just odd that I'm just rambling and ranting to nobody, or at least to unless you're online and sharing this moment with me. But I might bring it up a little bit later. But what I did want to start off with is by sharing some of the books that I've added to my pull list. A few weeks back, I shared my pull list, like books I've added to my pull list, and I like to share some of the books that I have added since then. I use Pullbox on previewsworld.com. The way that works is the books I add or subscribe to on that website automatically syncs to my LCS, so it alerts my comic book shop that I want these books on my pull list, and it's a pretty handy tool there. So I want to share some of the books that I came across in the latest issue of Previews. I'm not sure how many of you guys use Previews. Comment in the video and let me know if that's something that you regularly pick up. I've been getting into the habit of picking it up and skimming through it, and that gives me updates as to what's coming on in the horizon, what's coming up. So one of the books that I have chosen to add to my pull list is Shobo and Shofela Coker's New Masters. It's a book that's coming out on Image. It's a really good book. If you're familiar with, now I would do a Google search for Shobo and Shofela Coker, and what'll come up is Outcast of Jupiter. It's an indie book that they put out independently. You should be able to find them, find that on Amazon. Also, you should be able to find it on Gumroad, or some of their stories on Gumroad as well. They put out a lot of digital stuff, but the artwork is phenomenal. The storyline is phenomenal. It's basically this is a dystopian type story set in a futuristic or Afrofuturistic South Africa, Johannesburg. So if you haven't added this to your pull list, I would definitely get on that. It's scheduled to be out in February of 2022. So it looks really good. There's a lot of nice previews out online. You can check that out. But yeah, New Masters by Shobo and Shoff. They had another book that I had added to my list in my last video called Buckhead, I believe, and that looks pretty good too. All right, the next book I had was, I don't remember. No, I think it was Avengers Forever. All right, so this, maybe you want to chime in on this one, Kyle. The reason why I chose this book is because I've been speculating a lot that the storyline that's coming up in the next Ant-Man is going to be based around this Avengers Forever storyline that was originally came out in 1998. And I went, searching for this book. It became popular because the origin of Kang is in the original 1998 version of it. But I was always thought that it was weird that Kang would show up in Ant-Man, and I didn't really put two and two together. But then when I started thinking about how, namely because I started thinking that it might be Avengers Forever storyline, because I don't know why I just thought the Ant-Man character in the MCU is a good replacement for Rick Jones, who was the main sort of like center of the storyline in the original Avengers Forever comic. And we don't have a Rick Jones in the MCU, as far as I know. But as far as like for those who don't know, Rick Jones is sort of like this weird comedic relief character that just pops up. He doesn't have any powers. He doesn't, from what I remember. He's just this weird comic relief. I think he showed up a lot in Peter David stories with the Hulk, Incredible Hulk, and he's at the center of the original Avengers Forever. But since the MCU doesn't have a Rick Jones, I thought it would probably be the next best thing would be Ant-Man. And sure enough, I see this cover for the next Avengers Forever storyline, which is coming up the end of December. And sure enough, right there, smack dab in the middle is Ant-Man. So I don't get caught up in a ton of speculation as far as comic book collecting, but I did go out of my way to find a copy of Avengers Forever #1 for sure. And of course, everybody's been buzzing about, I believe it's issue 2 or 9, I can't remember which, but one of them has the actual origin of Kang, that book was actually pretty hot for a while. Probably still is. But I will be paying attention to this particular storyline because I think it has a lot to do with the next MCU big, huge storyline. What's up, Kyle?
With Avengers Forever here, I'm gonna bring myself on screen. I'm just gonna.
Yeah, go do
thing. Except now it's like weird.
You can turn the artwork off.
Anyhow, with Avengers Forever, especially the original 1998 one, look at who the members of the Avengers are.
Right.
When you think about why is Kang a part of this story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look at who that team is, and it will give you some insight as to why that decision is that decision. However, Jason Aaron taking a spin on that leads me to think that this is going to get us to a place for after the new Avengers, which is kind of widely considered to be the next wave.
The new Avengers, as in
Kate Bishop's Hawkeye, Echo.
Oh, okay, right.
That team is kind of widely considered to be the next wave in the MCU, but they have a relatively small window in which they exist. So then there's got to be a next phase. And if they choose to keep going down the Avengers rabbit hole, then the new Avengers, the next Avengers would be the Ultimate Avengers. So with not having the Ultimate Universe be a thing, they would probably skip that and come around to this Jason Aaron story and that origin of Kang and all of that kind of stuff.
Right. I know there's something there. And then the other thing is of course, is because all these alternate versions of all the Avengers anyway, it's like it ties directly into an idea of this multiverse thing where everybody is speculating, everybody's hoping that's the only reason why anybody's paying attention to this, because everybody's hoping that the X-Men are going to pop out of one of these holes, which I don't believe is going to happen. But
there's somebody more important that's got to pop out of one of these alternate timelines before the X-Men.
Yeah. Now, what's really interesting is that this does tie into the Fantastic Four, because Kang isn't he a descendant somehow of Richards? And I found it interesting that
he predates Reed Richards.
Right. He predates Richards, which suggests that Richards has been cast as African American.
Well, it's one of those things is that Kang is what Kang needs to be.
Right.
So Kang is African American. Kang is time, and he's not
right in the comics, but in this, I would be. That's the thing. It actually goes into what I think as far as the Fantastic Four. I don't think the Four, which is what they're calling it in the MCU, I don't think it's going to be the traditional Fantastic Four anyway. So
I honestly think, and this is why this Jason Aaron theory of yours has some traction. I think it's actually going to be the Future Foundation.
That's what I think.
Because now you can bring Tom Holland over.
You can bring Tom Holland on
and throw him in.
Since he already has control of Iron Man as far as Stark, he has Stark Corporation.
Mm-hmm. So then that story written by Matt Fraction, Hawkeye that's happening now written by Matt Fraction.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got Jason Aaron and Matt Fraction are tight. So there's some of that. These guys communicate, right?
Right.
So it's this last version, really, this last kind of end of the MCU leading up to really Loki. You had a bunch of influence from Nick Spencer.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're getting into the Matt Fraction, Jason Aaron, Chip Zdarsky stuff, where it's a little bit more weird.
Right.
And you can play with that because those timelines can just be retconned in the future if you need to.
Right. And I think that's what it is. Well, I haven't gone as far down the rabbit hole as you have, but I definitely saw the opening there because I just always thought Kang in the Ant-Man movie was just weird. Like it didn't make sense until I started thinking a lot about Avengers Forever. And that's when it definitely makes sense to me now because you got, because the Ant-Man in the MCU is such a comedic, character as far as that goes. That's what Rick Jones was in the comics.
Well, and if we're going to talk about the Avengers, right, as a thing going forward, something that's really interesting about the Avengers is some of the speculation about some of the stuff that's happening in Hawkeye and who may or may not be being introduced in Hawkeye. In terms of
did I miss the conversation? Yeah, did I miss any conversation about who was that pinched her on the cheek? Who was that?
I have no idea. I haven't seen episode 3 yet.
Oh, sorry.
However, I have a fun theory about some of the other characters that we met in episodes 1 and 2. So, but I don't get into that kind of stuff. But I really do believe that what they're going to do is they're going to set up and bring in more of the original Avengers team. And so Marcus is talking about it. Isn't the current Avengers team more closely related to the Ultimate Avengers in comics? Yes, but they're the most recognizable team. I'm talking about going back, and I believe we're seeing the introduction of the Swordsman and some of these guys who are Avengers, also bad guys sometimes.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward.
Right. So they're kind of introducing older Avengers and newer Avengers, and they're setting it up so that they can go whatever direction they need to go based on whatever future Disney decides needs to happen.
And all this leads to what I find interesting is all this eventually leads to a time there will be a time where all this Avengers stuff will feel old and dusty like the first Captain America movie because X-Men is going to take up so much oxygen in the room. It's going to be bananas.
Yep, absolutely.
Because if they do, that's why I don't necessarily look for a ton of Easter eggs around the X-Men or mutants because the way they're going to handle that, the way that has to go off, it has to go off as big, if not bigger than, the Avengers and what they did in Endgame and stuff like that. It has to be bigger than Endgame.
It won't have any problem doing that. When the X-Men are introduced, when the mutants are introduced, it will suck all the oxygen out of the room for everything.
Superhero, anything, right?
Right. It's not going to be worth it to even mess with anything else.
Nope. It's going to be bananas.
All right. I'll let you get back to it.
Yep. Thanks. And that was basically my speculation book. Again, I don't do a ton of speculation, but that is something, that is a book I've been paying a lot of attention to. Avengers Forever. All right, so which brings me to my next book that I've added to my pull list, which is, I can't remember. Yes, 7174 Annual by Ashley Woods. It's basically an art book, but you can actually order it through um, previews, right? You can tell your LCS that you want to add this to your pull list. I'm a huge Ashley Woods fan, and one of the few African American female artists in the industry. It's not a lot of them, but and I'll try to support her as much as I can. She actually has a lot of work in the indie community, so I'm anxious to pick this book out. It comes out March 2022. Um, and I'm actually anxious to see. Um, and I've already talked about this book, but I want to bring up again Monkey Meat by Junie Ba, only because I've been seeing a lot of buzz. They're really pushing it hard, and I'm enjoying the fact that Image is really doing, when people talk about things like diversity and things like that. I like the direction that Image has been going, like the handful of titles that are coming out from the African continent. I'm really excited about. Monkey Me happens to be one of them. I brought up a couple of other ones earlier in the show. These are all based out of Africa. So this is just a really exciting time, and I'm liking what Image is doing. Junie Ba has they put in like a huge ad and previews. It's just really interesting to see how when a company supports what you're doing and pushes what you're doing is very exciting, and which is even more angering, upsetting when you see a company do the exact opposite, which happened with Luke Cage's new book by Ho Che Anderson, which was canceled. Now, the reason why this upsets me so much is, um, well, here's like my personal story about it. It's like I don't know any details other than what Ho Che has shared on social media. There's been a little bit of news about it on Bleeding Cool, would suggest that possibly the book could come out um, anyway, but as of right now, it's been canceled. It's been put on pause, so to speak, which doesn't help anything, because if I know anything about the little bit I know as far as ordering and as far as direct market, uh, if stores can't order it, then it won't show up until it comes back on the calendar and has a release date and all that kind of stuff. So you have to, I would imagine you have to start the whole cycle back up over again for it to even to make it into the market. So there's no telling when this book will come out, if at all. This is supposed to be a book that's supposed to be leading up to, I think, Dark Reign, but this is not happening, and I am super upset about it. And the thing I was upset about most, this is when I started to really put things into context. So, in response to this cancellation, David Walker, friend of the show, made a statement that basically said, like, a cancellation happens for one or two reasons. Either one, the sales weren't there, and that part of it I'm going to kind of push back on a little bit. At least not what David said, but I'm going to push back on that being an excuse, right? So it might be sales, or they said it might be due to something that he did or said in this book that sort of pissed off somebody, and then basically they shelved this book. And I think it's the latter. And I think it's the latter because when I think about the numbers, I'm just making some estimations here. And I'm using David Walker as an example. Now, if they canceled this book due to poor sales, right? let's figure out a benchmark, and I'm gonna use David as a benchmark because he's probably one of the most well-known names when it comes to African American content or African American legacy characters at at Marvel. In fact, his Luke Cage, his Power Man and Iron Fist book, right? It debuted his number one debut. He sold close to 80,000 books of that story, right? Um, but just by on the average though, his comic book series, right? They average about when they come out, average about 25 thousand books sold on the average. And these numbers I'm getting from ICV2. Okay. So using that as a benchmark, I can't see this book not selling or having orders of less than 25,000. If that's the benchmark, if that's the lowest that even that David Walker has put out, and knowing that a lot of booksellers are familiar with Hoche's name, I have a hard time believing that. And this is a Luke Cage book, which is a legacy character from Marvel. And legacy characters typically always do good on the big two. That's why they are constantly relaunching them and doing number ones. So I'm not buying the whole low sales thing. Obviously, or maybe it's not so much that something he wrote. Maybe they're not happy with the product as far as art, maybe what they're putting out. But I'm familiar with the names, like especially Shawn Hill. And right in height, these are names that are fairly well known. At least I know in the indie community, that people are familiar with. I know those names enough to know that the artwork isn't the problem. That these are professionals. So I don't know. I don't like the way this sounds, and I think it has, and it doesn't necessarily make sense because, by cutting it, you really, there's been a lot of talk as to what. There's a lot of collectors are comparing what Marvel's been doing as far as diversity and Black legacy characters and what DC has been doing, and DC it seems to be at least they're catching up to what Marvel used to do, and now it just seems like Marvel is sort of like dropping the ball here. So that's the thing.
I have a theory for you.
All right, shoot. Kyle is my resident retail expert.
I don't think it's either thing.
Okay.
I think that we have to remember that Marvel is owned by a giant mouse.
Yes.
I bet the numbers weren't where they wanted it to be. Not to say they were too low, but they weren't where they wanted them to be. Right? So they would have expected this to maybe sell between 50 and 80,000 copies, and maybe they only sold 25,000 copies. Right, on pre-orders. Mm-hmm. Luke Cage is a character that has had some heat around it because it's one of those Netflix shows that got canceled, and then the rights reverted back to Disney, and they're starting to introduce Daredevil and the Punisher and some of these characters back into the MCU. Mm-hmm. My theory is that they're putting this book on hold. Mm-hmm. They're canceling Hoche's version of Luke Cage until they can make an announcement that he's coming back into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and name an actor to play them so that it can look like the character the actor that's going to be in the universe. Right? They did this 10 years ago with an Iron Man series. It was going to come out. Pre-orders came in. They canceled it. Then it came back out a year and a half later, and all of a sudden, the character of Iron Man looks miraculously like Robert Downey Jr. I think there's probably multiple factors here.
Yeah.
That, David Walker is alluding to some of them. Low sales. Maybe some of it's a little too hot button for Marvel right now.
Well, think about this. So check this out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like take the low sales theory. His Luke Cage book that came out pretty much when the Luke Cage hype as far as the show was probably at its highest, right? Those sales numbers weren't nowhere near the numbers that you're talking about right now for that book. And it still got out. It still made
but
it.
But they had a show coming out. So
it was already out
on a show, or a show coming out, plus low sales numbers on a book equals things you can merchandise. Right? You've got a book that's going to be supported by a show that you don't have any idea how it's going to do. Plus, you can sell toys and merch. Mm-hmm. Right? Right now, you have a book and no show, and no actor announced to play the character if he does come back, and no plan. So all you have is a book. Mm-hmm. And if that book's numbers come in a little low, and maybe the writing's a little bit too hot button, or the art isn't exactly what Marvel wants, or whatever, add another factor in there. Plus, maybe they're negotiating on a thing down the road. You put everything on hold, repackage it in a year, 8 months, 2 years, whatever, why that winds up being, so that you can put together this whole package. So that all of a sudden you go from 25,000 pre-sold copies to 70,000 pre-sold copies, plus t-shirts, toys, and you've got a show coming out on your own brand, Disney Plus, where you can put ads for the book in front of it.
I don't know. Only because, and I say, I don't think
Marcus isn't wrong.
Marcus thinks, I think the Luke Cage book is on hold because the numbers are low. Everything Marvel seems to do is driven by sales. I get that, but I would like to know what that number is, right? Because
and they'll never tell you.
Right, because if the last Luke Cage book that actually made it out, right? If they're, I'll put it like this: if they're saying that this book has to do, which is, neither here nor there, but if they're saying that this has to do what the David's Power Man and Iron Fist book did, that he has to sell at least 80,000 copies, then okay, then let that be the reason. But and say that, because they haven't said anything. They haven't said anything one way or another.
So I work with publishers who won't tell me why books are canceled. Right. Like, I'm doing page layout on a book that got canceled. Why? I'm in the middle of laying out the third issue. Why are we canceling this book?
Right.
I think it's far. You can tell me why.
I think it's far more personal, only because I honestly don't see them actually bringing Luke Cage into the MCU.
And they may not, but what I'm saying is that a book can do worse when it has all the boxes checked. There's a show, we can merchandise it, we've got this actor we like playing it, and there's a book coming out.
But think about it. That's only. But and then then we're making we're creating a mandate specifically for what? Black legacy characters, because not every,
I'm talking about creating a mandate for Marvel making bad decisions.
But that's what I'm saying. I don't
care. I don't care if the character's black, white, purple, green, space alien or not. Mm-hmm. Marvel is going to make bad decisions based on the way Marvel makes decisions.
Right.
Right. They don't have consumer confidence in the popularity of any of their characters, not just those characters. Like, they've canceled good selling books because the toy lines don't sell well. Mm-hmm. Like, I've seen Marvel make bad decision after bad decision in this regard. So what I'm saying is that when you have all the boxes checked and all of a sudden the entertainment department can carry the weight for the other two things, or the toy department can carry the weight for the other two things, mm-hmm. Marvel will give something a bigger chance. Whereas right now what was happening is this book was going to have to carry its own weight. And if it's only selling 25,000 copies at pre-order, that book isn't carrying its own weight, according to Marvel. So they're gonna write it off and just be done with it.
compared to what I'm trying to figure out is okay. So what compared to what? Because this is only a miniseries. It's not like it's like an ongoing series. So it's like what benchmark are you putting on this that will make sense? Like what book is on the market right now that's comparable to this?
Well, but it's not even that. It's a cost versus earning analysis, right? If it costs $100 to make the book, and the book only makes $10, it doesn't make sense to keep making the book.
But we know that's what I'm saying. This is a legacy artist. That's where I'm at. I don't. If they're saying like if the logic is it's not have enough sales, I'm not buying that because
I think you're making a rookie mistake in thinking that Marvel has logic that makes sense to anyone other than Marvel.
That's fine. I'm just saying like but it's like they're not going to. All I'm saying is that they can't. I used to want to, they could tell. There used to be a time where it could tell me that, and I say, oh well, if that's the case, then yeah. Because of what happens is what I'm seeing is that fans put it on themselves, like it was their fault that this book didn't make it out, which I don't think is the case at all. I think the fans responded exactly the way they were supposed to in response and support of this book. So it's like I don't think it has anything to do with us. I'll put it to you like that. Now, whatever reason they decide to cancel, there's a reason. But I'm just encouraging fans don't get down on themselves and think it's like, oh, if the sales aren't there, it's like, oh, it's because we didn't support this book or we didn't, support it, didn't do what we were supposed to do.
No, absolutely not.
That's not that
Marvel. Right. I would guess Marvel's angry this book didn't sell 100,000 copies with no support. Because this
is Luke Cage probably. When was the last time Luke Cage ever? So
it's the way Disney works. Disney gets angry when
you know what's crazy
when they don't sell 100,000 Disney years with the name Jackson on them. When there's only 50,000 kids in the U.S. named Jackson. Like Marvel's logic on crap doesn't make any sense because Disney's logic doesn't make sense.
I guess because here's an interesting point. It's sort of like
it had nothing to do with fans supporting the book or not. It had everything to do with unrealistic expectations from the publisher.
Okay, then if it's that crazy, then they must be expecting numbers like Black Panther #1 or Black Panther. Not, and I'm not talking about this past one. Maybe they're talking about they expect this book somehow to do something comparable to Black Panther #1 with the Alex Cross cover. It's like
I bet if it had the numbers that Power Man and Iron Fist hit, if it had done 80,000 copies and Hasbro was willing to make a toy of it, they'd have let it go.
But that's my point. Like Luke Cage has never been that character, so it's like they're asking for something that has never been the case ever. There's never been a hot Luke Cage toy. Right? It's like I mean,
right? No, it's
the magic number in sales that Marvel pushes for from book to book. They will let no numbers for this most popular title slide, right? But we'll drop a title that's considered borderline,
right?
So, like this book is obviously they must be expecting something like 80,000 at the very least, and it's probably coming in around 30 or 40. Which is reasonable under any other circumstances.
Yeah. Right. I would consider that good for a mini series from now. If that mini series was coming from, I don't know, the Ghost of Stan Lee wrote that mini series and it's only getting 30 or 40, then I could see maybe having a problem. But from names that aren't the biggest names in mainstream comics, they're big indie names. But they're not the biggest names in mainstream comics. I think asking for more than that is an unreasonable ask.
Of course.
And Marvel has this long history of being completely unreasonable.
I guess. Because it's it's like they're asking for, because even if I'll put it to like this, if they're asking this book to do what what's interesting, you can compare what David did with Iron Man, with Iron Fist and Power Man and Iron Fist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can compare that to what he actually did, because it was the exact same writer on the Luke Cage book that came out that was supposed to mirror what was going on in the show, right? It came out, the timing was that it was supposed, they were trying to capitalize off the television show, right? Those numbers
Mm-hmm.
are in the 20s, right? I think, but I think with Luke Cage, with Power Man and Iron Fist, he had the right creative team around it. He had the right tone. Um, he changed up everything, in that book compared to what he did in the Luke Cage book. But that was after the book came out that I could experience all that. I could actually see the differences. You know what I'm saying? I could see what they were selling and what they were pitching and all this other kind of stuff. It wasn't like it had to, but it had to, get out. You know what I mean?
There's something else we're not talking about.
Yeah.
The timing.
The timing of
So
this book coming out.
David Walker's book came out
Mm-hmm.
really at the height of the Marvel fanfare, right? Like everything Marvel did was gold. I mean, just everything.
Mm-hmm.
It was pre-pandemic. It was pre-economic problems. It was pre having to change distributors.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a bunch of stuff that Marvel had going for it at the time that are no longer true. And any business worth its weight is going to look at the current timing and what it's going to take to make something successful, and the timing of when the last comparable thing was and what it took to make that successful. So when we say, we want to know what the numbers are, yeah, but those numbers again are going to be wildly skewed based on what the internal Marvel numbers are, like internal Marvel costs, internal Marvel information.
I think they're going to be. I think those numbers are arbitrary.
I wonder if pre-pandemic, pre-Penguin Random House, pre, Disney Plus, if we wouldn't have seen this book get its run the way it was supposed to, because the internals at Marvel had more room for error. Compare Luke Cage sales to any other Netflix titles, and you'll see why they're hesitant to take a chance. Right? But again, that was all before, the current scope of things. Like,
I don't know.
I mean, you see it, in the real world. I see it in the real world. It's restaurants are running on less staff, partially because they have to, and partially because they realize they can. There's a level of things have changed in terms of the economics of business in the world that I think that's affecting everything, including comic book publishers. So the economics probably don't make sense anymore to go with a book that would sell 30 or 40,000 copies in a world where, Venom, their most popular book, was selling only selling 90% of what Venom would have sold 5 years ago.
But that's assuming that all the other books that they're currently running are doing what, over 50, 60,000 copies, which we know not to be true. So it's
right. But I'm saying I know that Venom, their most recent Venom series,
right,
when it ended, was selling a fraction of what the first 10 issues sold, and that the first 10 issues were only selling a fraction of what the previous Venom miniseries, Venom Space Knight, had sold.
I saw some numbers for the last Black Panther run, which were actually disgusting. Like if Black Panther wasn't the flagship Black legacy book that it is, those numbers would have had that canceled years ago. But the fact that it's the only book of its kind, you can't cancel Black Panther. But it's
we're
like,
in a
but you would
time
be,
where that
but it's
we're in a
amazing that
time
they
where
didn't
that matters
reboot it,
less and less.
huh?
We're in a time where I think that matters less and less. Where at the
What,
end
those
of the
numbers?
day, it doesn't matter what your biggest legacy titles are, what your biggest, most important character titles are. If that dollar figure at the end doesn't come out to what the check needs to be, you can't keep running it.
No, but that's what I'm saying. It's like they've been running. It's almost as if they've been running Black Panther the last storyline. They've been running it literally at a deficit. If you saw the sales, if you saw the sales number, if you Google Black Panther sales on YouTube, there's a really interesting, and I don't know, I might have stumbled across some type of to be honest, I might have stumbled across some type of Comics Gate guy. I don't know, but it was a really, he was talking about Black Panther sales on the Colts run. Basically, this is what we're talking about. And if you look at those sales, like just like we're talking about now, the targets is like if if they're expecting Luke Cage to do those numbers, that's just ridiculous. And they should have not even picked this book up in the very beginning. That's the whole point. It's like there's no way you can expect Luke Cage to do 250 some thousand books sold, right? This is what the first Coach book, and then the second Coach run did half of that, right? Did closer to 150 some thousand, right? But in between those the sales of that book almost hit 15 to 20,000 books sold, which is amazingly low for a Marvel book, for a Marvel legacy book like that. And it's low in the sense that if any other book had gotten that low, they would have rebooted that book several times. They don't necessarily cancel legacy books like that. They just reboot it. They just bring in a new creative team, a new storyline, and there's new number one, and start the whole thing over again. But in this particular case, they gave Colts such a huge run, regardless of the numbers. It didn't matter how low they got.
Well, let's talk about this too, because Comic Toby has a point, and then there's something to be said about Ta-Nehisi Coates. Right? What if every Marvel comic is a script for a potential MCU movie? We know there are future Black Panther MCU things.
Right.
So your loss leader is actually, you can move that loss out of publishing and into marketing for the future, MCU movie. And now you're not operating at a loss anymore. Like, there's all kinds of creative ways to make the numbers work if you're Marvel. Yeah. Right? But we don't know that there's ever going to be another Luke Cage thing. So where you can't play games with that kind of thing.
My only pushback is that it's like, this is a book it's not like you're making such a huge risk that you wouldn't normally do any other time. You know what I mean? It's like they've always.
So here's the other question, right?
Luke Cage. They've always rolled the dice on a Luke Cage book. If this was any other book, if this is any other, I think it has to do with the fact that it's this particular legacy character, right? If this was any other character that was somehow questionable and doesn't really have the fan base, I would give it to you. It's sort of like, it's not strong enough, the sales aren't there, let's cut it. And you wouldn't be taking a loss because the fan base isn't really, there to support the book, the character anyway. Like, it's like a character like, for instance, not Miles because he's hot, but if it was somebody like Sync from the X-Men, if all of a sudden you give him a solo book, there's like the fan base isn't there for it to happen, even though he's buzzworthy. It just wanted you might cancel it due to low sales. I get that because he's not a legacy character, but somebody like this dude carries, that's 40,000 in sales. I would think just out the door. So
when I had my store, do you know how many people got Luke Cage when it came out?
Billions of people. They shut down.
I just pulled up the pull list. I had 3.
overran the story. Well, yeah.
Right.
I get that.
You know how many I had for Black Panther?
2.
50.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about a scale.
Right, but that's the thing. It's like, so what are you comparing? What are you comparing this book to? It's like you can't be Of course, you want to compare it to Black Panther. It's like, so what's the benchmark? It's like,
so
if David's the benchmark,
I'm trying to mention
David.
Right?
That's what I'm saying. But if David's the benchmark and not Black Panther, not Christopher Priest or Coates or anything like that, if David's the benchmark, then we're talking about at least 80-some thousand. But on the average, David has always done at least 20-some thousand, and those books get greenlit. So it's like, if that's the number that you have to have is 20-something, I'll be totally surprised if this only reached 15 or something like that, and maybe that's the case.
And in the new world, it's entirely possible. In a Penguin Random House world, where, I mean, it used to be easier to take a chance on ordering that kind of stuff when it was coming from Diamond. Now it's coming from PRH. It's a whole different demon. Like, I know people who are ordering, literally, they're only ordering enough Marvel to fill their subs, fill their subscriptions. Right. They're not ordering any for the wall, any for a rack, just because it's so much harder and it's so much more confusing than it used to be. So some of this is timing, right? Like, this book solicited at a real bad time. Now, there's something else that needs to kind of be mentioned here, and that's, what does a guy like David Walker or Ta-Nehisi Coates command in their contract when they sign up to do one of these books? Right? I bet it costs Marvel a lot more to buy Ta-Nehisi Coates out of his contract, because I'm sure that's the kind of contract he had, than it did to publish a Lost Leader Black Panther book. It might be a lot cheaper to buy out somebody else and just cancel the book and just be like, look, we agreed to pay you this much money, then plus this much per issue. Just be done with it. There's so many factors that we can't possibly know, because they're incredibly private factors.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Right. It's the
not just Black Panther either, because Coates was on Captain America. That was also
right.
With similar numbers.
Right. When a book gets canceled, we can't look at it just in terms of the book itself. There's so much business economics.
Right.
That we'll never understand. I remember when Marvel put out X-Men Gold #1, and if you don't remember the whole big mess that came out with X-Men Gold #1, they had to fire the artist after the first issue, and they never were able to get their legs back under them on X-Men Gold #1 because of what it cost to reprint that book, pay off the people that need to be paid off, redistribute that book. Like, it was awful. And so when they canceled that book, before they canceled the much worse X-Men Blue, or the, God forbid, X-Men Red that came after them, it made sense. Like, it's just they could never get their legs back under them. So when we talk about what these companies do and the decisions these companies make, there is so much we can't possibly know. Like, and Marcus would be a great person to talk to about this, because I'm sure Second Sight has had to make these hard decisions economically about books that are, books that, are they going to publish it or not? What are they going to do? Or, that kind of stuff. And there are factors that I'm sure none of us have thought of.
Right.
Like the paper shortage, the ink shortage.
If they would have said, that's right. But here's the thing: it's like, then give me that reason, right? It's like their silence is more telling than anything for me. You know what I mean? Because if it was as simple as a sales issue, everybody would have bit on that.
But if you say that, if I say, hey, I can't sell this book, and now that's going to be out there in the public for my competitors and my shareholders and everybody else, that's not a look I want to put out. You know, if I'm Marvel, I still want to pretend like I'm the big boy, like I'm not losing ground to everybody, except for maybe DC, who's losing ground just as fast. Like, I don't want that out there in the world, that book, that I can't sell this book with this legacy character that's been incredibly popular, that, you know, we need to be part of our world. Like, I don't want that out there. So they're never going to give you a reason, you know.
Okay, but that's okay. But that's right. I'll never probably get a reason. That's all. That's
but
cool.
That's also why we get to have these conversations too, you know. Like,
right. Instead of like, but all I, you know, the last word on it is basically, you know, as fans, there's no need for us to beat ourselves up about it. It has nothing to do with us and whether or not we support Luke Cage or Ho-Che Anderson or those fabulous artists that were on that book. It's nothing to do with us and what we did or didn't do. It's basically totally arbitrary BS. I could say BS, can I? Coming from Disney and Marvel and all that kind of stuff.
Well,
and with
totally
that,
arbitrary in our own eyes. In our eyes, it's totally arbitrary.
Potato.
Hey, there's some bean counter somewhere who could completely make this make sense. Of course, they couldn't tell you what Luke Cage's superpower is, but they could tell you why it makes sense on the sheet.
I doubt it. I like to have that person come on. Anyway, I'm running out of time. I was late last time. I don't want to get Miss Jen mad at me again. All right, so for everybody here on Black Comics Universe, my man Kyle, and everybody that showed up. There's a lot of people in the comments this time. Thank you. This is awesome. All right, I'll check you out next week. Peace.